Well, good morning. I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name's Deanna Dubois, and I'm the Executive Director of WellShare International. And again, really welcome all of you here today. I'm very, very pleased that we're able to welcome Dr. Nancy Henkin to the Community Health Worker Peer Network this morning. Dr. Nancy Henkin is the founder and former Executive Director of the Intergenerational Center at Temple University. She is currently serving as a Senior Fellow at Generations United, and is a national consultant in intergenerational practice, policy, and research. She received her PhD from Temple University and is a leading authority in the areas of intergenerational programming, community building, and lifelong civic engagement. She currently serves as a member of the Mayor's Commission on Aging in Philadelphia and is a recipient of many, many awards, too numerous to mention. In 2006, she was elected into the Ashoka Fellowship, which is a global community of social entrepreneurs, for her efforts to build communities for all ages. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nancy Henkin, and I'm sure you'll have a great morning.
Thank you. Thanks. Hello, Minnesota. It's chilly. I didn't expect it. As you can see, I had this little sleeveless dress ready for spring weather because it was 70 in the 70s in Philadelphia. So it's okay. It's sunny and we're inside and it's warm. So we're going to have a good time. And I'm really delighted to be here. I love working with Diana, Eugenia, and Nur, and Tada at WellShare. And I've worked here a number of years with different organizations, and Minneapolis happens to be one of my favorite places. So I'm delighted to be with you. Today we're going to look at both how to look at health across the life course and how to bring generations together to promote healthy communities. And I want to start by getting to know a little bit about you. So how many people here work mostly with children? Anybody? Couple. Work mostly with adults? Work primarily with older adults? Okay. How many work mostly with individuals versus family or community? And how many work more at the family level? How many work at the community level? Oh, interesting. So it's just a really good mix. How many of you ever done any kind of intergenerational work, bring generations together? A couple of you. Okay, that's good. Well, we're going to start out with something a little interactive. Are you up for that? Get your blood moving. And it's called an age line. Has anyone ever done this before? A couple of you. I know. Okay, what we're going to do, just to get us in the mood of thinking about generations, is non-verbally. That means you can't talk. That means you're not supposed to go like this, but non-verbally, as much as you can. The person who thinks he or she is the youngest person here, look around, will stand around there, around the coffee machine. And the person who thinks he or she is the oldest will be around here, and you place yourself where you think you belong. Easy, right? When I count 3, no talking, get in there, and just, there's no right or wrong, wherever but just figure out where you think you are relative to other people. Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Do you want me to put on the board?
So when I say what's the best thing about age, okay. Those things, but what I'm most interested, so you can do that, but what I'm most interested is what are the health challenges of other people, experts, and then we can look at common. I hear a little talking. Come on. Okay, now we have to move up here. Everyone can't be. This is I'd say a youngish group, so move up a little bit. I don't think we have too many 90-year-olds here. Matter of fact, I might be the oldest, which is really freaking me out here. Okay, so the oldest should be over here, and everybody else should be over here. And we'll introduce ourselves this way too. Okay, there's a little grouping here. Do you have any order you want, and where do you think you? Sure. Well, you can just stick yourself in anywhere. It doesn't matter. We're gonna tell our ages right now anyway. Hopefully everyone's okay with that. Are you the oldest? Okay, so Eugenia thinks she's the oldest. So I know I'm older than Eugenia. So okay. let's give it a try. I'd like you to, now can we spread out a little so you guys are next to each other? You're all in there. Maybe you spread this, you guys go this way. Okay, good, look around. The age line. Say your name, your organization, and your age. Nice and loud.
My name is Mayeli Barrera. I'm a community health worker and with Portico.
Nice and loud. And how old are you?
26.
26, okay. Is 26 the youngest? What do you think?
My name is Dana. I'm here from Greater Twin Cities United Way, and I am 25.
Okay, switch places there. Okay, we're gonna make a few adjustments. That's okay. Nice and loud.
My name is Fortune. I'm 24, and I work with OSHA.
Okay, 24. Come up here. Move on down. Okay.
My name is Melissa, and I work for Tobacco Free Alliance, and I'm 23.
Somehow they got this mixed up, but it's okay. They all are young in spirit. Yes.
My name is Tada. I'm with Wellshare International, and I'm also 23. My name is Sydney. I'm with Pillsbury United Communities. 22.
Okay.
I'm Saida Mohammed from Wellshare International. 28.
Oh, I think you said 20. 28. Okay, we're moving up a little. Okay.
Michelle Jin from Minnesota Department of Health, and I'm 28.
Okay, that's good.
Ashley Mitchell, Wellshare International, and I'm 27.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Nirmal. I'm from Korean Organizations of Minnesota, and I'm 34 years old.
Okay, let's see if any of these people are before you.
I'm Sweta Nayak. I'm from Wellshare International, and I'm 31.
Okay.
I'm Diane, and I'm from HCMC, and I'm 28.
I'm Maria. I'm from Wellshare, and I'm 32.
Okay. No, you're moving down there.
I'm Erica. I'm with Portico HealthNet, and I'm 27.
Ah, come on down. Let me go over here.
I'm Laura with Portico HealthNet as well. I'm 29.
I am Maria. I am with the City of Minneapolis Health Department, and I'm 28.
Okay, go down that way.
Christina Flores with Westside Community Health Center, and I'm 30.
No, you're just gonna keep moving down. Okay,
My name is Abdullahi from Wellshare International, and I am 34.
you and they're the same, right?
Good morning, I'm Erica. I'm with University of Minnesota Extension, and I'm 30.
I'm Caroline with Westside Community Health Services, and I'm 31.
All right.
I'm Ashley from Pillsbury United, and I'm 32.
Hi, I'm Jess with Dakota County Public Health. I'm actually 40.
Whoa, getting up there. Okay.
Hi, Moses Bakir. I'm 37.
Okay.
Morning, my name is Gay. I'm from Anoka County Community Health. I'm 38.
38, great.
I am Jen from Wellshare International. I'm 37.
Okay.
My name is Natasha. I'm with the City of Minneapolis Public Health, and I'm 8.
My name is Angela, and I'm with People Incorporated Mental Health Services, and I'm 47.
I don't know what yeah, I want to say, in some age lines, where it goes up to like 100, you'd still be down there. So it's interesting to look at how age lines are different depending on where the bulk of the people are. Yes.
I'm Miley. I'm from Wellshare, and I'm 44.
I'm Maria with Wellshare International, 44.
I'll switch with her.
Still waiting to see if I'm.
My name is Fatima Mahmoud, and I work at Wellshare International. I'm 47.
Okay.
I'm Deanna Dubois with Wellshare 59.
I'm Barbara Green with Barbara Green and Associates, and I'm 64. I'm Mary Edwards, community health worker, HCMC, and 60.
So you're down that way.
I'm Gloria Cole, and I'm with Eastside Neighborhood Services. I'm a community health worker, and I'm 58.
Okay, so you're down there.
Hello, I'm Eugenia Kanan with Wellshare International, and I'm 62.
And you're And okay, oh my God, I'm Nancy Hankin from Temple University. I'm 69 and a half. So, because next year my big birthday, 70s. Really big. So we go from you're 22 to 69. So of the 20s go to where? Where's 30s go? Big thing. So the 20s, what's the best thing about being your age? Just shout it out. What's the best thing about being in your 20s? Possibilities.
Unknowns.
All the unknown.
Feeling good every day.
Okay, I'm feeling great. One more. That's great. Come on, you're in your 20s. What's great?
Being in our 20s is great.
Okay, just being in your 20s, seeing your life ahead of you. 30s, where you go till, where's 40? You're 40, right? Okay, 30s, what's great about being in your 30s?
30s is when you're 20.
Okay, what else? What do you love about being in your 30s?
I don't feel 30.
Whatever the.
About what other people think, and you know yourself, feel really solid in yourself.
Okay, more solid, more grounded.
Yep. More stability and things that you know.
Okay, more stability. One more.
You actually use your brain now.
I'm not going there. I'm not going there. Okay, see what you have to look forward to. You can actually use your brain. Okay, 40s are up to where? Just a few. Okay, 40s. It's great about being 40s. A lot of experience, yeah.
I feel like I have things figured out.
Emptiness.
Okay, kids are gone. We're back to your 20s. I love it, right? Anything else in the 40s? Easier to be blunt. Oh yeah, I've been blunt all my life, and then people say now that she's old, I can listen to it. When I was in 20s, they're like, who is that person? Okay, 50s. What's great about being in your 50s?
I say knowledge.
You accumulated a lot of knowledge.
Feel very grounded. I think I actually appreciate people more, and you've had more life experience, so you've kind of seen different stages.
Can you all hear this?
So you can relate to young parents, you can relate to teens. You've just gone through a lot of different cycles.
You've been here.
Yeah. And hopefully learn lessons learned along the way.
Right. And 60s, what's great about being in your 60s?
Barrier free.
Great.
Freedom, flexibility, you don't care.
Yep.
Survival, resilience.
Right. So
Fun.
Retirement.
Right. On the verge. Okay, so lots of good things about being every age. I want to think about what are some of the challenges, particularly health challenges, that you or people your age experience. So in your 20s, and I'm talking about physical and, psychosocial. So what are some of the challenges that you or people in the 20s face now? Are you 20? Okay, I thought, are you 30? Okay. So mental illness. Beginning of mental illness, okay. What other types of challenges?
Living at home versus living out on your own.
So struggling with autonomy and independence.
Decision making sometimes can be challenging.
And it can be stressful. What do I do with the rest of my life? You have all this and more to go. Any other health challenges?
Risk-taking behaviors, when to start to slow them down a little bit.
Okay, so you've moved out of your teen years and you're in your 20s and you're still not ready to give up everything. So what's too risky? What's okay?
Jumping off some cliffs.
Yeah, you may not be jumping off.
Insurance.
Right. You may not. You think about health insurance now. How about in your 30s? When you're in your 30s, what are some of the health challenges that you or people you know go through? Go ahead.
Your joints start to hurt.
Oh God, they start to hurt in the 20s. So I'm 30s. Okay, your joints start to just wait. Sorry about that. Okay, your joints start to hurt. What else?
You have to be cautious of what's going on. You have to think, if you have a family, you have to think of them. You have to think of the decisions that you're making, because you have to take them into consideration as well.
We have more responsibilities. It's not just about you. It's about you and all the people who are around you. What else?
Yeah. For me, I would say I play soccer, and it was the last few year and a half or 2 years. I would say it was very slow, and I
You're very slow or just slower?
Yeah.
Slower.
Yeah.
Well, if you're playing when you're 70, it'll be interesting to see what you do. So you're not quite as fast and adept as maybe you were, at 17 or 25. How about 40s? Oh, yeah, this is 30s, 40s. Yeah. What are some health challenges? Back pain. Okay.
Threshold, fighting with disease onsets and trying to prevent. You're in a transition, and so you're acclimating different. Your body is acclimating different. Your brain is acclimating different.
Right. You're at a transition point. You're midlife. Yeah, and you're figuring out what do I have to do to stay? Yeah, more health conscious.
Just more disease, more prevalent. They're knocking at your door, so it's kind of being more aware.
And 50s. Yeah.
I mean, I feel still really healthy, but I'm dealing with a 90-year-old mother who's having a lot of health issues. So I think kind of being that sandwich generation of, you have kids to worry about. They're doing great, but you're always wondering about them, and then just have an elderly, frail mom. So just really trying to help her out as much as I can with a busy job too.
So the sandwich, the caregiving issues, which may not be so critical for you, become more critical as we get there. And the 60s, what are some of the health challenges?
Well, for me, I would say caregiving as well. Taking care of my parents, my elderly parents.
And preserving your health. Right now, my closest friends tend to be very healthy and very active. And there's a group of us that want to dispel myths about aging and changing language that is very common in society. So we're very conscious of that. So I think a lot of it is preservation and keeping our minds, bodies, and spirits really active for a very full life.
So there's more intentionality about preserving and improving health versus just taking it for granted, I think is what you're saying.
So I can't really participate today. Sorry.
You could say something.
That's okay.
And for me, I guess it's really realizing my vulnerability and that I'm closer to this end than I was at this end. And so at 69, you think, well, I can live hopefully 20 years, but I know that there are really life, challenges that will be facing me, whether it's caregiving or my own health. And so it's just realizing that I don't think I realized it at 20. I didn't think about mortality. I didn't think about illness. I just thought about having a good time. So I think that's a realization. So were there any what did you see that was common through here, or what did you see that was different through here as you look from the 20s to the 60s?
That every age group had challenges.
Yep. And there might be psychosocial, they might be physical, and you might not even know what they are. Because the truth is, I once was doing something, there was a young man very seriously impaired, and he said, at any moment you can move from being able to disabled, and it can happen like that. And so in some ways, we don't even know what lies ahead. What else? Anything else you saw? People didn't talk as much about the body, but bodies do change. You said a little bit about moving slower. Moving slower. I mean, so I feel that I have to make more effort to stay healthy now. I have to work out. I just started strength training, which I never would have thought about at that age. So it's important to look this way. I'm going to take you. I'm going to have you, since you're only 22. So just look into the eyes of all these people. Okay, see, you're getting later into your 20s. How you feeling?
Just going by.
Okay, you're moving into your 30s soon. How's your body feeling? Okay, you're feeling good. You have some health issues. You may not be running as fast as you had before, but
playing soccer.
You're playing. Okay. And you're going to move into your 40s here. You have some other responsibilities, maybe. You still feel, how's your anxiety?
3 kids now.
Oh. Okay, we're going to move around here. Okay, 3 kids. deal with some things. You're in your 50s now. You may have some caregiving issues. Your parents are older. You may be dealing with your kids and your parents. Bones are a little creaky, but you're doing okay. Moving into your 60s,
You survived this long.
You've
Sure.
survived. You've just joined a gym.
Okay.
You're staying healthy. And then the people who aren't here,
Taking up
You're-
yoga.
you're right. You're looking ahead at maybe 20 to 30 more years. How does it feel to have gone through the life cycle in 2 minutes?
A little exhausting.
Exhausting. All right, let's thank her and let's all sit down and we'll talk about this a little bit. Good job, everybody. Okay, where's my little thing here? Yeah. Okay. How did that feel? Were there any ahas when you looked around, like where you were in the line, or anything that was surprising to you? Yeah.
It was very refreshing because I think it's the first time in my life that I've ever been part of a process based on age, because age is something most people don't like to talk about, and it was so revealing and refreshing to be part of it and just put it out there. And it's the first time in my life I've ever had the ability to do that. And
Well, I'm glad you did it because there are a lot of people who are really uncomfortable. Now I pushed you to it, and the norm was you were going to do it. And there might have been people who are thinking, oh, let me out of here. But this is also a relatively young group. I mean, I've done this in nursing homes with preschool. Like I was in Hawaii, 5-year-olds to 101. So you can imagine. I mean, it was fascinating. But often, like professional women, older women, don't like to tell their age. Older men often don't like to tell their age. I was doing something with some corporations, and some CEOs said, that's not something we talk about here, because there's such, in our society, we're youth oriented. And so we don't value aging. And I always tell people, aging is a process from birth to death. It's not something that starts at 50 or starts at 60 or 65. Those are when services come. But when you're 5, you age to 6, right? When you're 15, you go to 16. When you're 30, you go to 31. So this is really about the aging process. And I think normalizing the fact that we can share with each other, yeah, I'm 69. You know what? I'm feeling good. And I think we're not role models for each other. So often, the stereotypes come because we don't get a chance to talk to each other about what's important, what we share, what the differences are. And we all live in communities side by side. So a lot of my work over the last 36 years until I retired, and I'm semi-retired. So I moved into not full-time work at Temple, but I do a lot of consulting, and I'm probably just a little more balanced right now than I ever was before. So today I just want to talk about this whole idea of all of you are in the health field, so health workers or public health people. How do you promote health, not just in one age group or another age group, but how do you promote health from birth to death? And that's supporting the aging process, supporting individuals and families and communities. So why is this important now? Oh, see, it does work. Where are you, Gina? I'm so amazed that the animation is working. Okay. So there are major demographic changes. You all know we're aging, that the increased life expectancy has resulted in many, many more older people. In 1930, there were 5% of the population was older. Now by 2030, over 20% will be older. And I'll get another one. Okay, so if you look at, let's see, female and male, and you look at this as the age pyramid, you see that there's a large number of boomers. Many of these, and the boomers are those 60, many of us in their 60s here and late 50s are looking for ways to stay connected, ways to be productive and be, valuable members of communities, ways to be independent and active. Also, as we get older, there are going to be more calls for social services, support services, the fastest growing population is the over 100. I know 3 people, 3 mothers of friends of mine are 100 or 101. I mean, that's phenomenal. It's phenomenal to think that people are living that long. But we have to think not only about the quantity of years, but the quality of those years. And if you look here too, the millennials, which many of you are in your 20s and 30s, is about the size of boomers. And by 2030, people under 18 will be about the same percentage, about 22%, as people over 60. So we have a very different kind of demographics where, if you walked around in communities in the early 1900s, people were living till 40, 45. And now you see all these people in their 80s and 90s. And that changes the way we have to look at health, the way we have to look at development. And in addition to just age diversity, there's racial and ethnic diversity. Oh, wait, I skipped one. Here it is. So as you can see, minority groups are becoming majority groups, particularly among young people, and this is primarily in the Latino community. And what's interesting is now they're talking about something called the racial generation gap, that over 80% of older people are white, although there's still growing diversity, there's still majority white, whereas the majority of young people, particularly coming up, are of color. So what implications does this have when you have, an under 18 group of color and an older white group, ethnic groups? And unfortunately, we've seen some difficulties right now. We're dealing with immigration issues, we're dealing with intolerance. But what does it mean when people have different experiences? How will people support each other over time? Will older people invest in public education if the kids are not, if they're not reflected in the kids' faces? Will young people support Social Security and Medicare and, over time if they don't really know the older people? And so I think it's a real challenge to think about how do we take this demographic change and say, this could be a terrific opportunity for new collaborations, for new partnerships, but it also could result in a competing agenda. Who wants what? Are we kids groups? Are we elder adult groups? Are we middle-aged group? Who gets, what percentage of the resources? So the 3 major trends contributing to why it's important now is 1, the demographic change, and 2, this weakened social compact. So a social compact is the obligations we have to each other over time. So when I was growing up, my grandparents lived about 20 minutes away. My parents and my sister and I supported them. And they had supported my parents. My parents supported us. And I knew when I was going to be older, I would support my parents in any way I could. And in fact, after my mother died, my father came down to Philadelphia, and he didn't live with me, but I was a major caregiver. And this was just the way it was going to be. I knew this. And my hope is, I have 2 grandchildren now and 2 children. My hope is that when I need support at some point, my kids will come to me and be able to support me. But the social compact is weakening, and in families, it's getting really complicated. There's divorce, there's remarriage, there's stepchildren. People move, to different parts of the country, and they're not necessarily there to support each other over time. And so there's this challenge of whose responsibility is it to care for whom? And you have many multi-generational families now. So you may have grandparents taking care of grandchildren, kinship care. There's real growth in this. You may have older adults caring with adults with disabilities. You may have, parents, adults caring for their really older parents. And so you have this mix of expectations and mix of people often living in the same household and trying to negotiate, again, what roles we play and how do we promote healthy living over time. And I think in immigrant and refugee families, I know a lot of you work in those communities, this is particularly important because in many cultures, the family is the most important unit, not the individual. And so how do you support, the whole family? And how do you help people figure out how to deal with some of the changes that come with acculturation and moving into a new community? And in the broader society, we live pretty age-segregated lives. I don't know, I'm pretty sure in Minneapolis too, but schools are here, they deal with kids. You have senior centers over here, have older people. The workplace is mostly people in the middle, although it's getting more mixed. You have, retirement communities over here. So in many ways, we're very segregated, and that can lead to some problems in terms of how we see each other, the ageism we talked about before. If you don't know people, you stereotype because that makes it more comfortable. So there's tremendous ageism. Ageism isn't just young to old. It's also old to young. There are many, many older people here who are so judgmental of young people. And I think, weren't you there? They need to do the age line. Weren't you there? Maybe it was 70 years ago, but you were once young and you were struggling with these things too. And so when we're age segregated, we don't have those opportunities to get to know each other, to build trust, to combat those negative stereotypes. And so in the end, what do we have to do to start creating opportunities for people to be reciprocal, to be interdependent, to understand that we have a shared fate? What happens to you affects me, and what happens to me affects you. But in terms of age, people often don't think that way. Oops, what did I do? So the third trend, I think, is our siloed approach to problem solving. And I don't know what kind of organizations many of you work in. I know many of you are at the health department, but in terms of your placement for the community health workers. But many organizations are really struggling now, really afraid of losing funding, and this has been for a while, and trying to survive. And rather than thinking about how do we work together to address an issue, even though it's called collective impact and that's an ideal, most nonprofits I see are pulling back, doing what they need to do to stay alive, and dealing with their clientele. So if I'm a school, I'm going to deal with kids. If I'm a senior center, I'm going to deal with seniors. If I'm in maternal and child health, if I'm in aging, if I'm in environmental hazards, I'm going to deal with my piece of the pie. If everybody has a shared vision and they move toward that shared vision, that's fine. But I think what's happening is everyone's so nervous, they're competing for resources and competing for, who can, whether it's promote health or promote education. And, this is supposed to go like this. Okay, that's one thing about it. And so we live in this siloed world. And with, the impending cuts that are coming, I think we really have to start thinking about how do we start fostering collaborations? How do we get out of these silos so that we really think about promoting healthy communities? So this is about promoting lifelong health. So health, obviously, is a huge issue. And we all know, and you all have been working on this for many, many years. And again, some of this might be repetitive to you, but health is not just physical health. It's really a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. And it's not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And I think it's important to understand the broader picture of health. And it's an issue, obviously, that helps people, that affects people at every age. And this diagram just shows you that little baby, if she lives long enough, will be that older person. What children do, experiences they have, obviously impact how they're going to age. And more research is looking at that health is not just about genetics. It's about genetics, it's about social factors, poverty, education, gender, experiences, and it's also about culture. How do people view health? And I've done some work in the Somali community here, and now with the Karen community and different immigrant communities around. And it really is interesting how people see health. Did a focus group, I think it was Vietnamese elders, and we asked, what's healthy aging? This one woman said, she said, healthy aging is the success of my grandchildren. Which I think is true of many immigrant and refugee communities, maybe not of some of the white communities that I work in too. And so if you're going to understand health and you're going to look at just individuals and not the family in some communities, that's just not going to work. And we just know that there are health disparities, and that there's some communities who do not get high quality health care, do not have access to health care, and who have more major illnesses. And we're not going to be able to overcome those challenges until we start working together and really understand what happens along the lifespan and how can we be inclusive in what we do. So most of you know about risk and protective factors? So risk factors are factors that make you at risk of unhealthy behaviors, and protective factors can reduce those risks and hopefully help you lead healthier lives. But most of the time we don't talk about how risk and protective factors are different at different ages and what the commonalities and differences are. So if you think about some of the risks for early childhood, low birth weight, lack of attachment, maternal attachment, child abuse, poverty. Those are all risk factors. And unfortunately, if people experience that, it's hard unless there's intervention. They tend to start on a trajectory that's not going to be too healthy. It's called cumulative advantage or disadvantage. You know, people, if you start out really challenged, there are lots of things, unless, again, there's some significant changes that keep you in a disadvantaged state. So adolescence, what are some of the risk challenges in adolescence? Anybody? What's a risk in adolescence?
Educational risks.
Educational risk. If you don't do well in school, that's a risk.
Drugs.
Drugs. If the drugs are all around, that's a risk. Yeah. Parent conflict, rebelliousness, lack of mentorship, lack of caring adults. All those things affect kids who are going through this really challenging period of adolescence. Midlife, we heard some of the challenges in midlife. Stress from caregiving, dealing with your children, dealing with your parents. Work, all the stresses of work. I mean, midlife is really stress city. Finances, am I going to make it? So just the sense of responsibility that you have in midlife and the stress can be tremendous impact on health. And finally, in older age, what are some of the things you think would be risk factors in old age? Health, yeah, health, absolutely. Falls, absolutely. So just how you earn life. Widowhood, mental health, financial, dealing with that sense of independence versus dependence, role loss, empty nesting. So all these things are risks, and they are risks, and they continue, across the life cycle. But protective factors can be built in along the way that can really help reduce those risks. So for children, some protective factors, if parents are involved, if there's quality childcare, if young people there's early childhood education that's really high quality, if there are high expectations for kids, hopefully some of that will offset the other risk factors. In adolescence, a lot of the research shows that caring adults outside the family who can serve as mentors and advisors can really help a child navigate that treacherous course from adolescence to adulthood. Having good academic skills, having the ability to make friends, having the ability to access the help of adults. Those are all things in adolescence that will help you get through all those risk factors. In midlife, there's a lot of research now on, again, you don't just plop into the world as an old person. You go through all these stages first. So if you're going to be healthy as you age, a lot of the work you have to do is throughout your life, but particularly in midlife. And so I was just reading a research article that said positive affect, optimism, and social support are 3 critical protective factors in midlife. Some people see bad things happen and they internalize it. I did something wrong and it's my fault. Others say, things happen and I'm going to get through it. My father's a perfect example. So my father lived to 95, and when he was about 60, he had macular degeneration. He lost his sight in one eye, and he lost my mother when she was 78. But he decided he was just this optimistic person and just was going to live life. He actually met another woman, and then they had an affair for 10 years, right? That was really nice. She was older than he was. He finally lost the sight in his other eye, and I'd say, "Oh, Dad, how are you dealing with this?" He said, "Well, at least I can hear." And then he lost most of his hearing, and he said, "At least I can walk." And then he fell, and he needed to use a walker. And he said, "I'm here. at least I'm here. I wake up and I don't see my name in the obituary and I know I'm here. And it was his optimism that allowed him to live to 95. And that's really important. My mother, I think, she fell from a hip and she had hip fracture and she went downhill right away. And she didn't have this optimistic view on life. It was, oh my God, this is what happens. And and she had retired and had no purpose. So the optimism, the positive affect really contributes to longevity. And the social support is a thing that I think goes through all of these, that we all need people. We need a support system. And we have this crazy concept in our country that independence is to be prized above all else. It's okay when you're a little baby dependent, but after that, we need to be independent. We need to be out there. We need to be autonomous. We need to be able to do things for ourselves. And, our service system, the advertising, everything is about being independent. And so when you get to the point when you can't be, it's devastating to your self-esteem. What we really need to think about is interdependence, that at different points in life, we need help. At different points in life, we give help. And that if we had that value, then people wouldn't feel so terrible about having to ask for help in the later years. So, so again, in midlife, this optimism, and in old age, and I'm saying old age, but I don't know where that starts. So it's probably somewhere past where we were today. Okay, it's always old age, so it's 10 years older than you are. So we're talking about late 70s here and onward. People are looking for a sense of purpose. They want a role in life. They want to have meaning. And again, in different families and different communities, this is more important than others. But if you are used to being, the purveyor of wisdom, you are used to being able to give advice to people, and then suddenly you're nothing. Again, I did a focus group with some Somali elders in North Philadelphia, and I asked the Somali man, what is aging like? How is aging different in Somalia and here? And he said, in Somalia, I was like a king. Here, I'm nothing. And I think there are many, many elders who feel that way. And so how can we as a community and families create roles for people, give people a sense of purpose, and create and maintain a support system so people don't feel isolated and don't feel alone? Because we know that just social isolation and loneliness can contribute to many, many health problems. So what we're really talking about is resilience, lifelong resilience. That's my dad. When I gave the eulogy, I said, my father was a resilient man. And things happen. We can't go through life thinking that there's not going to be adversity. You can't protect people from adversity. What we can do is build up the capacity to deal with that adversity, to adapt, and to not only to survive, but to thrive. So that, and some of the, I don't know if you can read this, but optimism, a self-belief, feeling like I can do it, a sense of efficacy. I can actually have some control over my life, a sense of humor, social support, ability to problem solve, having a positive attitude, emotional awareness. So all these things are really important for children, for adults, and for older adults. And I think one of the roles of community health workers and public health workers is to help people build the capacity to be resilient, to thrive and survive the many, many changes that they will have in life. So most of you, or many of you, worked with individuals. So I'm going to do individuals, families, and communities in terms of how we promote health. So it's really interesting to look at generational differences. And there's very little research in immigrant and refugee families about generational differences. So I'm going to tell you what the marketers have been saying around people who are native-born Americans. And I want you to think about how this might work for other communities. So every generation experiences some common moments. So for the silent generation, those people who were born 1925, 1945, they went through the Depression, they went through the World Wars. They were very loyal to the government. They were patriotic. They had to scrimp and save. And those characteristics, when you're an adolescent, the way you experience these major historical changes impact the way you look at life, your whole life. So it's not like the 70-year-olds then think the same way as the 70-year-olds now. It's that generation thinks a certain way and thought that way throughout their lives. So in terms of healthcare, the research is saying that these are people who are loyal to healthcare providers, and they follow instructions and they look for direction because that's how they grew up. And so these are people who want to go to the doctor, who listen to whatever the doctor says. They don't necessarily want to be involved in healthcare decisions. And these are generalities. And again, culture and life experiences impact this. But in general, the people who really want to get direction and guidance from their health providers. The baby boomers, the research says, are thinking, not so much. I want to be involved in making my healthcare decisions. I want to find out about things. I trust you, doctor or health provider, but tell me about it. Let me learn about it. And I'm going to ask a lot of questions. And I know that's for me. I had cancer 15 years ago. I made people crazy asking questions. I did my own research and I wanted advice, but I wanted to be involved in the decision. One doctor said to me, well, I'll just make all decisions. Don't worry about it. I said, you're not the doctor for me. I can't, I want to be involved. Gen Xers they were the latchkey kids. Those of you who were, who were raised in the United States and who were here in that period. This was a time of disillusionment. It was Watergate. It was people were very cynical about government and about institutions. So many Gen Xers want to be really independent and they want to make their own decisions and they want to find out their resources. So for them, health providers are good and they can help them find different resources and figure out what to do with a little input. And finally, the millennials we know are techies. And I don't know how many of you are techies. I am not a techie, but more and more health technology is appealing to millennials. And many millennials just want to go on the internet, find out everything they can about whatever is health disease confronting them, and then make some decisions. And it's not that they don't want the input from health providers, but they assume much more responsibility for investigating all the options. Now, would you say that even if this isn't true in different communities, I think actually when people came and immigrated to the United States might be a critical factor in immigrant and refugee communities. So if you came when you were young, it may be that that some of these characteristics apply to you too. If you came when you're older, they may not. Any reaction to that? Do you think that in the communities you work with, that there are generational differences in how people view health?
Okay. One of the things I think is native customs versus assumed customs. And when you're new in any environment, especially a new country, you bring your own value system with you. And then it may or may not conflict with the value system within the community that you settle in.
Right. So, and that's a critical issue because and we'll see in families when that happens. But generationally, if older people, so if you're older and you come here and you grow old and you in your native country, you had a certain set of beliefs, but then you're coming here and the traditions are very different, it's going to be harder. If you come here when you're young and you're culturated quickly, it may be easier to deal with some of the newer things that are happening in this country. Yeah.
For example, my grandmother, who was from Mexico, she was very naturalist. So it was, drinking teas and the foods that you were eating. As she got older and she had diabetes and stuff, she still watched what she eat, but she obviously had to take her pills. But to us, she would always implement, the way she grew up. So when we got ill, it was always her remedies before, going to the doctor and actually taking medicine.
And do you still use those, or do you?
I do use them with my kids.
Yeah. Okay, so that's interesting. That's like the generational transfer of those things. Anyone else Yeah.
I think the social determinants of health have really changed depending on where my parents came from. So my parents were from Laos, and they came here, and their health was completely just the way that they were aging was very different. Again,
Mhm.
very similar. They were farmers, and so they walked everywhere they went. And here, they had a lot of richer foods to eat, more access to that, less access to being more active. And so I think that their frame of around healthcare was very confusing for them, and that didn't help us either instill good health values for us either. So it's somewhat still very foggy and kind of a mess. I feel like the Gen Xers and the millennials in my community are still trying to figure out like where we are and re-educate ourselves because we didn't get that education from our parents.
Seems to me it'd also be like, how do you differentiate? It's not that there's so clearly a right and a wrong. So how do you sift through all that and say, there may be things that my mother and my grandmother taught me that are valid and that I want to continue sharing and experiencing. And there may things that I need to set aside in this country because there are other options. So I think it is kind of stressful to think about this, but most people don't even think about it.
Yeah.
So the implications for families are pretty dramatic. So especially if people are living together. So if you have a grandmother, a parent, and kids all in the same household, and you have to make decisions, who makes the decisions? And so one of the things for older people is if you came from Laos and you made the decisions in your family because you were this respected elder, and you come here and you don't know English, so you don't have health literacy or maybe even other kinds of literacy, and decisions have to be made about your health, who makes them? Often the grandchildren and the children, because they're the ones who accompany the elders to the hospital or to the doctor to translate. And so you can imagine in terms of self-esteem what an elder goes through. And, I think family members don't really understand this often because they want to do the best. I want to take care of mom. I want to do the best for mom. I want to make sure she has that. But by taking all the decisions away from mom, that diminishes her feelings of self-worth and self-esteem. And we know that can lead to depression and other kinds of health problems. So there are many, many implications. Who makes healthcare decisions? How is caregiving done? So we know that most people work. Most middle-aged people work. And often they have aging parents at home or nearby and children. And the stress that comes from figuring out who cares for whom and can I expect my children to care for their grandmother when they may or may not even speak the same language. And the guilt, and we did a lot of focus groups, there's a lot of guilt among middle-aged people saying, I can't be everything for everyone. I actually have to support my family. That's the most important thing. I have to, bring in financial resources. And yet there are all these conflicts. And the older people say, well, my expectation is that I cared for my mother and my grandmother, and my children and grandchildren will care for me. And when we did focus groups in different immigrant communities around with young people, they said, it's not that I don't respect my grandparents. It's not that I don't want to help them, but there's so much peer pressure to be acculturated, to be like my peers, and I want to fit in, that I can't run home all the time. I can't, I have homework to do. I have all these things to do. And so, figuring out what happens in families, the whole issue of kinship care, so many grandparents raising grandkids, what are the relationships? So when you go out and you work with individuals or you work with families, thinking about what are the generational differences and how can you, if not bring consensus, at least unleash or create a safe environment for people to talk to each other about these issues. But it can be very complicated, and it can be very sad when people don't do that, and then people within the family, often particularly older people or the young people, feel really isolated. And I think the other thing is that families create habits, healthy habits, unhealthy habits. Often, the grandmothers will make food. So in some communities, fried food that's what we want. We want a lot of fried food. We love it here at Traditional Recipes. And, we know that's not healthy, but that's part of who that grandmother is. Young people, and often grandparents want to sit around the table and have a full meal in all communities. And sometimes young people just want to gulp it down in front of the TV and run off and do whatever they have to do. So what are the kinds of eating habits that the family has? Physical activity. You know, do families do things together? So it's not about just going, if you're working with an older person, or you're working with a middle-aged person or a young person around physical activity, you have to think about context. You can't forget that they go home. And if the norms at home are sitting on the couch and watching TV after every meal and not taking walks and not going out, that's going to be really hard to change behavior. So it's just really important when thinking about multi-generational families. And they may or may not live in the same household. Even if they don't, they impact each other. So understanding and really thinking about what are the views, how are each of these people thinking about what I'm suggesting, what health means, how to access health care, who to go to. Is it a traditionalist? Is it herbalist? Is it the high-tech guy at the hospital down the street? You know, just being aware of what those things are. Yeah.
How much did you get into about like dealing with siblings too? Like, so having multiple adult siblings and then you're trying to deal with
siblings. So my experience is mostly around caregiving, and in every family, including mine, usually there's someone who ends up, I'm not gonna say being the martyr, but being the primary caregiver to older adults. And often it creates a lot of conflict. So my father was in Philadelphia, I was in Philadelphia, my sister was in New York. I had expectations that my sister would come down more. I had expectations that she would help me more, but I was the one, because I was there and I got that, who took him to the doctor, who took him out every week, who helped make food, etc. And we were pretty civil about it. It wasn't too bad. I have seen families and worked with families where there's tremendous anger. Sometimes it's usually the daughter. If there's a daughter and son, usually the daughters take on the responsibility for caring for the elders. But there's always a combination of guilt and frustration and anger. And people don't talk about it. It's like people don't talk about age. People don't talk about caregiving. They don't, I say to people, if your sister is taking the responsibility for caring your parents, do something to provide respite. Send her some flowers. Tell her how much you appreciate it. Even that, talk about it. Tell her that you understand and appreciate what she's doing. But you get into patterns and then it gets worse. And so then the siblings are out here and often they want to come in and make decisions at different points when the person who's been there, the caregiver all the time, says, excuse me, what do you know? I've been here and I'm exhausted. And so caregiving is really complicated. And again, I don't think we look at this across the lifespan. We're always caregiving. We may be someone's caregiving for us, we're caregiving for our children are caregiving for us, we're all caregiving for each other. Figuring that out, figuring out sibling relationships, shared responsibilities, understanding spouses. I mean, there are lots of issues with older spouses, caring for older spouses. It can be very, very difficult. And what often happens is the one who's not sick gets sick because they're so stressed out. And I know all these situations where the parents don't want the help from the kids because they want to be independent, because this is what you're supposed to be. So it's like, this is all a negotiation. It's like life is a negotiation. But if you don't talk about the stuff, if you don't create a safe environment for people to talk about it, then it's like ugly. It's rears its ugly head, which I think is what probably you are referring to, where there can be lots of sibling rivalry. And who's the better daughter? Or who's the better son? Who do mom and dad count on? All of those things. So again, I think as you move in and do more and more work in the health field, thinking about how you work with families is critical. Any other questions before we move on? Just interrupt me at any time, because that's fine. So you work with individuals and promoting individual lifestyle changes. We work with families to try to change patterns in family and understand generational differences. But in the end, place matters. The zip code you're in can often impact your health. And there are issues of the social determinants of health, intergenerational transmission of poverty. Unfortunately, if you're born poor, chances are you're going to grow older poor because you haven't had the opportunities, cumulative disadvantage, that others have had, unless there's an intervention. And one thing I forgot to mention in terms of the life lifespan and risk factors and protective factors, there are critical transitions where some type of intervention really makes sense. So when kids start school, when you move into middle school, move into high school, you start a job, when you end a job, if you lose a spouse, those are all critical transition periods that are ripe for health interventions. And so again, looking at a family, looking at the issues that affect people at different ages, and thinking about what can we do to bring up these issues, to think about protective factors. So I don't know if you can read this, but so for the last, I worked at Temple for 36 years. I founded the Intergenerational Center, and I did lots of different programs that brought young people and older people together. I was a used car salesman of intergenerational work. You give me an issue, I will tell you a way that young people can support older people can support young people, education, health, etc. And I'll tell you a little bit more about them later. But the last 10 years, I worked in an initiative called Communities for All Ages, and I was lucky enough to, it's a national initiative to work in 23 communities in rural Mississippi, in San Clemente, California, in Moose Lake and Proctor in northern Minnesota, in Westchester, New York, and all Florida, all over the place, to look at how can we build communities that are good for growing up and growing older. Because again, it's not just about an individual's health, it's about the social determinants. And if we can get to the root causes of health problems, then, and a lot of that is in place, then hopefully the health of the whole population will be better. So when we think about a really good, healthy, vibrant, resilient community, we think about people having a sense of belonging and purpose, opportunities to learn and work and contribute. People have strong support systems. They have safe neighborhoods. So violence, which is such a risk factor, isn't a risk factor. You can walk around because it's a safe neighborhood. Affordable housing, good quality housing, good transportation so people can get places and aren't isolated. An environment that promotes healthy living, so clean air, and an integrated system of support services so that families don't have to run all different places. I have a child that needs this, I have a parent that needs this, and I need this, that somehow there's coordinated services that you can use at different points in your life to support your family members. So thinking through this is really different than thinking about the way we work now, which is siloed. So instead of just working with just young people or older people or middle-aged people, instead of thinking of just the environment versus education versus health, every community created a Communities for All Ages team and took on an issue, and they listened to the voices of all different ages and came up with a plan to work together. And it's a process. It was very hard because people aren't used to collaborating and they aren't used to acknowledging the strengths of generations. So again, often we see young people and older people as problems to be solved, not resources to be tapped. So this kind of was thinking about it, well, how do we really create a community where people are empowered, they feel good about each other, they support each other, and they use each other as resources? So what will it take to build a healthy community for all ages? What could you do, and what should you be aware of as you think about communities that are healthy for all ages? And again, that people are supported and empowered and engaged throughout the life cycle, that different organizations representing different age groups come together. It makes me crazy when I hear about childhood obesity initiatives. Like, we're putting all this money into childhood obesity initiatives over here. At the same time, they're like diabetes prevention classes for older people over here. The root causes are the same. And you need to start thinking about how could we think about access to food and physical activity and environments that are, will produce healthy living versus just for kids or just for older people. And kids live in families, and families have older people and young people. And again, the strong social networks that we know are such protective factors. One of the most protective factors for older people is having a confidant. Research shows that if you have a confidant in old age, it helps buffer some of the indignities you have to go through, which, you think about it, and there are a lot of really isolated people. And if on one level they had even anyone to talk to a little bit, would that minimize their risk for severe depression? Yeah.
this is very interesting to me because I'm working on with a very interesting initiative statewide on this particular subject. And we've done a lot of listening sessions. How do communities age? And these have been intergenerational listening sessions.
Great.
And they've been taped and videoed, and they'll be shared shortly. But it was very interesting in all these communities around Minnesota, urban, rural, variety, when the question, what does healthy aging look like for you? It was a surprise to many of the planners because we got answers that we didn't expect, and we expected more about talk about place and what we call kind of really practical physical matters. And in most of these sessions, it went right to relationships. And it talked about, the result was, as we're aging, we need to heal our relationships. We need to contact my daughter who lives in New York or my grandmother. And these are the places that I need to start. So it was just very interesting, again, that it went right to relationships and healing and repair.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up. And actually, I want to see those videos because I'm doing some age-friendly focus groups when I get back to Philadelphia. It's about connectedness. You go through life. You don't want to go through life alone. And you want to go through life having the ability to have relationships with others, to be supported by others. And a lot of the research shows that there's a tremendous correlation between sense of connectedness and longevity and health. And if communities can create opportunities for people to be connected, then the community itself, as well as the individuals, are going to age better. And it's very challenging. But I'm also glad you mentioned the listening to the voices, because in many of the age-friendly initiatives, they're only talking to older people. And I keep saying, well, if you're thinking about a community that's good for everyone and you want to do a healthy community, how can you only talk about older people? Because if we think about aging from birth to death, we should be hearing from everyone what would make this place a better place for me at my age. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you've worked with the YMCA before, because that's such a great example of all the different silos within that specific building. You have childcare, and then you have senior adults. And I used to work for the Y, and I really did see that a lot too. Was that they just weren't able to figure out how to socially connect with each other and really help each other out. It was really just problems as opposed to resources.
Yeah. Made me crazy, because I think the Ys are perfect examples. And also, but faith-based too. I mean, there are lots of places, libraries. I mean, all these places have all the generations often coming together, and yet it's parallel play. So you have, I've been to many Ys where they have a early childhood program here. They have like a senior center program here. They have the senior silver sneakers. They have youth coming in. Never do they connect the dots. And actually, I just talked to I'm doing some research in senior housing, and there's a senior housing complex in Baltimore that's on the same campus as a Y. So they're starting to interact, but minimally. Like some of the older people go over and see the kids. Some of the kids come over for Halloween or for things like that. But when I said, well, if you're really talking about healthy aging across the lifespan, there are so many ways that the Y can get involved. But it's true, it's just like in faith-based, there's the missionary society, the older group, the youth group, and again, unless the leaders are intentional, so my favorite word is intentionality, unless there's intentionality about connecting those dots and bringing people together and creating welcoming environments for all ages, then they continue doing their parallel play. And so this is something, again, I think many of you as community health workers and public health workers can start thinking about, like, why are we in these silos? Why can't we get out? Think of the possibilities if we all came together, and did this. And that's kind of what Fostering Alliance is across different age groups. And so in Yonkers, the Y there worked with the Area Agency on Aging and worked with the local church, and they worked focused on a specific neighborhood. How could they increase health in that neighborhood? And so people who ordinarily didn't come together, and in all our communities, we made sure residents of all ages were involved. And so that was really important. So it was nonprofits, institutions, and residents of all ages coming together and say, how do we make this community a good place for all of us? And this is hard because there are turf issues, there's competition for resources. And so somehow you have to get to that point where we say the big vision is more important than, and we all can contribute to that vision. And here's my role. I don't have to take it all. And, and in places like the Department of Health, there's so many ways to contribute to health, and I don't know whether there are times when people actually come together and talk about where are the interactions. It's not just the physical environment. It's not just, environmental issues, the air pollution. It's not just individual lifestyles. It's all the above. So this is for planners, and I know you said planning, but whether you're in public health or doing planning around the built environment, again, do we think about creating places where people can interact? Do we think about places where people can both can have their grandparents and their children? I was in Japan a number of years ago, and I was so impressed because there was a group in a neighborhood that decided they wanted to make pocket parks for us, so little parks in different neighborhoods, and they wanted to put a playground in, but they were very intentional about putting benches next to the playground so that the older people could be there and be able to sit while their grandkids were playing. In San Clemente, a group of young people and older people and a community organization got a big grant to redesign a park there. And because it's warm there, they're able to put playground equipment for kids, but also adult exercise equipment near each other. Again, where you place things make a difference. And so if one set of equipment's here and one's there, there's never a chance to interact. But if there are gardens or walking tracks or ways to connect, people interact, and then you get the social connectedness. Something I'm really interested in, this last one as an example, is multi-generational gathering spaces. So because we're so age segregated, there aren't that many places where different people in a community feel like they can hang out. Right? So, young people may go here, older people come here, maybe Starbucks if people like coffee, but they don't necessarily hang out there. So one of the things we're looking at around the country is how can, rather than having senior centers and youth centers, couldn't there be community centers that are real community centers? There are lots of places that call themselves multi-generational centers, but they're parallel play. They have one thing here, one thing here, one thing here, and they don't connect. But what if we really had facilities that brought people in and that were intentional about creating opportunities where people got to know each other? So this is in Ajo, Arizona, and there was a old abandoned school building, and a community organization got money to revitalize this. They built some live-work spaces for artists of all ages, and they created an intergenerational what do they call it? Like community center and art center. So people, they were having a lot of issues cross-culturally between the Tohono O'odham Native American community, the Mexican community, and the white snowbirds that came in. And through art, and art can be very healing, through art, they brought people together, they shared their cultural arts, and they worked together. They created puppets, they did parades, they brought in different kinds of teaching artists, and they had this place where they all came. And when they thought about offering watercolors, they used to say, okay, we'll offer painting for kids on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we'll offer this for older people on Fridays. Suddenly they said, well, why are we doing that? Why not just, it's so simple. Why not offer an activity for everyone? And then as part of the activity, they're not only doing the activity, they're getting to know each other. And that's the key. If we know that social connectedness is so important, if we know that relationships are so important, what can we do as social service and health providers to foster that, to create those kinds of opportunities? So the other thing is we know that civic engagement is really important for health and longevity. Lots and lots of research. If you have a sense of purpose, if you can use your skills and experiences in a meaningful way, that's really important. So these are some examples. That's actually my dad at 90, and we created a program called Time Out, which was engaging college students to provide respite care to families who had older adults. It's not rocket science, but no one had ever thought about this. And we ran this for 25 years. And so we got college students at Temple who were either paid by the families, but many of them had work study, so they didn't have to charge at all. We charged like $7 or $8 an hour, which was half of home health care. And my father used to play the bass, and I'd have students come in, and one guy brought a guitar with him and play with my dad. They'd be there. And when I went to my dad and I said, he had got Alzheimer's around 90. This was right before that I saw there were some changes. And I said, I'd really like to have, someone come in and stay with you a little bit, because he was living independently at that point. And he said, no, I'm okay. I don't need anybody. And then I figured, okay, I'll change this. I know some students who really want to learn about aging. Do you think you could help them learn about aging, because you're aging really well? Absolutely. Bring them in. I'd love to have them. And, just like, if you don't make people feel like they're always the recipients of service, but somehow they're giving something back. So you're teaching them about aging, and they're coming in and spending some time with you. So Time Out has been replicated in, where is it? It's in Los Angeles and in Pittsburgh right now, and in Bethune in Florida. And again, it's something I'd love to see happen in Minneapolis, because you have all these college students who need to learn about aging. Because one of the things is we don't teach people that aging is a natural process. All of us here will someday be old, and some of us aren't there already. And what does old mean? It just means older. It's not old, it means older. So how do we help young people think about whatever you go into? There are more older people out there, whether it's a helping professions, whether it's business, medical, whatever it is, you're going to be interfacing with different generations. So why not have that experience when you're in college? So we had another program down here called Shine, Students Helping in the Naturalization of Elders. And we did this started in the 1980s, and it's still going on. And that's around mobilizing young people to teach English to older immigrants and refugees, many of whom were really isolated. And we created a whole health literacy curriculum. And again, it'd be great to replicate some of these ideas here. So young people, some of them were from the same community, some of them were not. So you had both intracultural relationships forming and cross-cultural relationships forming. And again, both of those are so important. And we told everybody, like, you're both a receiver of service and a provider of service. So the older people didn't feel like we're just idiots and we don't know English. They were also, particularly with young people from their own community, they were sharing their traditions and sharing the values of their community.
Just say, I think this is just a huge opportunity to what you're bringing out. And as we form that lifeline, there are more and more ways we can do that. Right now in the Twin Cities, but nationally in Chicago and other cities too. This is just an example. We've got an aging population with dementia, Alzheimer's, and many people have a lot of myths about that, and we don't know a lot about it, society, just due to the lack of research. And there's something I'm intimately called Giving Voice Chorus here, which brings intergenerations around singing together. And just quickly, what we're finding is that with medical students, for example, who are going into gerontology and are part of these choir where people with Alzheimer's and dementia are singing together because they can learn new songs and they can learn new music. The young physicians who are being trained are getting a totally new perspective about aging, and it's as much, if not more, a gift for them as for the person with the disease. And we're finding that when we bring people together with a disease and with their caregivers in a united activity with social activity, you cannot tell who the persons with the disease are and the persons who are the caregivers, because it's being normalized and people aren't being stereotyped. So I'm just going to say there's so many opportunities.
There's so many. I mean, really, there are so many opportunities. It's really just, I call it using an intergenerational lens. It's not a program, a thing. It's saying, what am I doing? And if I look a little differently and think about an intergenerational lens, how could I bring different generations into this? And the thing with medical students is really important. I just was reviewing an article for a research journal, and I think it was in Europe, and they had med students paired up with healthy elders in the community because they felt that med students only interact with the frail elders. So that it reinforces their stereotypes about all older people are just going to decline. And if you don't, again, if you don't come in contact with people who are able to live in the community, and they still can have chronic disease, but it really challenges their perceptions. So yes, there are many, many things. This is kinship care. This is in Arizona, an older Latino man caring for his grandchild, and all the issues. I mean, I don't know if you look at this at all, but the role of grandparents in the lives of kids is really important. It's not just there are programs where older people who are unrelated connect with kids, but there are also opportunities for people, grandparents, to interact in a deeper way with their own grandchildren. And now that I'm a grandmother with 2 adorable grandchildren, I'm thinking, how do I stay in their lives? How do I, understand what they're going through in a very intentional way? We had a program called Family Friends around the country, and that was where older people served as family friends to children with disabilities. And this was incredible. Like, not every older person wants to spend time with a child with disability, but the people who did, they gained so much. Again, they felt like they were able to give. They felt like they had a role. They felt like they were productive. And many of them had chronic illnesses. Many of them had problems. I remember one woman had polio, and we connected her with a child with polio. And what a role model to have a 70-year-old, this child was maybe 10, to have a 70-year-old who drove, who was still active, who was still involved, and could mentor her. And the top one is a program called Friendship Across Ages, which I've been talking to Diana and Eugenia about doing here, maybe, where we recruited older women from all walks of life to help young refugee women. We worked primarily with Burmese and Bhutanese in Philadelphia. Just learn about how to negotiate life, how to deal with landlords, how to deal with principals, how to find the things you need in the pharmacy. And again, it's about that friendship, that lack of connectedness, so that if you create these opportunities for people to actually know each other, they may or may not become best friends, but it's a support system. It's somebody else outside your immediate community. So the whole idea of, as you're working with people and thinking about health, engagement, how do you make sure it's not just about you need to walk, although that's important. It's not that's just about eating healthy, that's important. But it's also about how do you get them to feel good about themselves and feel a sense of purpose and contribution. So a number of these initiatives around the country really looked at issues like physical activity and access to health. So in East Hattiesburg, Mississippi, which is a pretty poor community in Mississippi, it was a food desert. No access to fresh food. Grocery store was miles away. Transportation was really difficult. They were really isolated. And obesity is a huge problem. So the university teamed up with a kinship care program, with a community organization, and they created farmers. And they created a farmers market, first of all. So every Saturday they had local farmers come in, and they set up this thing right in the middle of this very little town. And they sold fresh goods. They also had nursing students come and do health screenings on a regular basis. They also had little jumping things for little kids so that the kids would get exercise. And what was really great, they had young people in the community help organize this. So they worked with a retiree to help organize this. So they gained, some entrepreneurial skills. And then the older people delivered fresh food to homebound elders. Now that's like one intervention. Think about all the benefits there to the young kids, to the parents, to the older people, to the sense of community, there's so many positive things. And here, this is in another part in Mississippi, in Itta Bena, they started a community garden. And so, young people, older people all came and were part of a community garden. On the top right, that's in Port Chester, New York, they had a group of churches got together and created God's Green Market. And the churches, some of them were primarily white, some of them were primarily Latino, and some were mixed, and they all came, and African American, and they all came together, and they had a garden, and they also got things from upstate New York. They came and they distributed, and all ages were part of the collection of fresh fruits and vegetables and the distribution, and so that was great. In the middle is a cooking class, and this happened at the Y. So the Y in someplace in New York, they decided there were all these older people who could learn about nutritious eating and cooking and then teach it to young people. This is not that hard. I mean, it doesn't even take that much money. You know, if you can get some older volunteers to come into the Y, you get the kids come, and then they think, and everybody learns about cooking healthy, and they get to know each other. And this last one, that's in Moose Lake. So when I did the work in Moose Lake and Proctor, in Moose Lake, they, who's been to Moose Lake? Anybody? Couple few. So when you drive in, there's this ugly yellow kind of hockey stand. And they wanted to make the entrance just more attractive, but also they wanted a place where people could come together and gather. So for about 2 years, they really worked hard. They got this parcel of land. There was a group of young people and older people who worked together. They worked with an architect, and they decided they didn't have money to create a huge thing, but they were going to make a pavilion. So this pavilion just went up about, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and they have a farmer's market come in, and they do fairs there, and it's a community builder. And again, this idea of community pride and creating physical spaces where people can come together and do things, and you're promoting health, but you're also promoting the social connectedness. So there are many, many ways to think about how and what you're doing could you be more inclusive. In terms of physical activity, in Yonkers, they started an intergenerational walking club. This isn't hard. And you know who led it? Kinship caregivers. Grandmothers who are caring for their kids who feel overwhelmed and stressed, but you gave them a role to lead intergenerational walking groups. You could do this in churches and synagogues. You could do this with community groups. Why not have scheduled times where people and their extended families, the older people and the young people, it's not just a youth walk. It's not just an older adult walk. It's a, intergenerational walk. You can do it after services. You can do it at the Y. And this is Tai Chi, where some older people in a Chinese senior center decided they wanted to help other older people and other young people understand the benefits of Tai Chi. So they went around the community. This happened to be a temple. We had a big open space, and we had students coming, and the older people were their models for Tai Chi. There are many, many ways to think about physical activity. Also, just people advocating for better sidewalks. There was a program in Yonkers where young people and older people went around and checked out like broken sidewalks and broken glass, and it was a pretty low-income area, and then they reported it to City Hall. So they were really advocates. Another place, AARP does a lot of walkability studies, but it doesn't have to be just old people walking around. Why not have intergenerational walkability studies and think about what could we do in our community to make things better? In Mesa, Arizona, they did an intergenerational safe routes to school. So safe routes to school, they're trying to figure out how to get kids to walk more to school. They had older volunteers walking with them. Sometimes it's called a walking school bus. The older volunteers got exercise. The kids got adults to take them places. I mean, this isn't rocket science, but it's using that intergenerational lens to think about what you could do. I'm just going to talk a little bit about this wonderful program here that Nur and Tada and Eugenia and I have been working on, intergenerational tobacco prevention. So this is one of their sessions. They're working with the Karen community, and you can add something if you want. But basically, they're starting to look at tobacco cessation across the lifespan, rather than looking at just how do we stop smoking among young people, how do we stop the use of chewing betel quid, right? For older people and adults, how do we look across the lifespan? And in some of the workshops, they've looked at what are the motivations for young people to get involved in tobacco, middle, older, and what are the barriers? And tonight we're going to be looking at what are some strategies if we all work together to look at how we change the norms about smoking. What other activities could we do? How do we look at families and family patterns so that, again, if the grandparents are smoking or chewing betel quid, if the adults are doing that, there's a good chance that those kids are going to do that. So you can't just work with different ages in isolation. You have to think about, the whole family unit. So before I get into this, are there any questions? I've talked a long time, and I want to have time for you to talk in your groups too, but what are some of the things that this brings up for you? What are some of the questions you might have, or what are some of the challenges that you might experience as you either think about generational differences, try to do things in place, or in working with individuals or families? What are some of the challenges if you used this lens? And there are a lot, so yep.
The group that I specifically work with is HIV or Hep C, so there's a lot of stigma, especially when it comes to like letting family members know. So mine would be, you know, involving what family members know, or who knows and who doesn't know.
Right. And that's always, I mean, such an issue in terms of privacy and confidentiality. And yet, when people don't know, sometimes they really do know, but the, you know, they're supposed to keep it a secret. So you have this privacy and people being so isolated without being. So a lot of this is around creating safe environments. How do you create an environment in a family or in a community where people feel safe about disclosing? And self-disclosure in and of itself is actually a protective factor, as I said, with confidants. If you have to take everything on you and the burden is all on you, the stress is really tremendous and can lead to physical problems as well. At least if there's a shared burden, if you have people you can work with and can see as supports. But that means you have to be willing to delve into some long-term family dynamics, which sometimes can be hard. What else might be a challenge for you as you try to do some of this work? Come on. Yep.
Breaking down taboos, because in a lot of our communities, there is a mistrust of the medical profession because of what has gone on in African American communities.
Right.
Experimentation. And so, you know, a lot of people won't even go to the hospital or go for checkups, and they're utilizing the emergency room as a first contact, and, you know, about just teaching people and letting them know about awareness. But in the meantime, forming the relationship with them. Because so many people come into African American communities to so-called empower without engaging.
Right. Exactly.
And then you automatically get a pushback. And then the negativity spreads that they don't want this. It's that they don't know you.
Right. And it's so important. I mean, just the whole, again, life is about relationships. And whether it's in families, in communities, between health providers and residents, clients, patients, whatever we call them, we don't necessarily put enough time and energy into building relationships. And I see this all over with service providers, you know, whether it's health or other kinds of service providers. We're here to provide a service. We're trained to provide a service. We know best. We know the evidence-based models, and we're going to do this without doing the engagement first. And so I think, again, that listening to the voices of everyone and understanding the generational differences. So when you work, if you're in a mixed age group, being very conscious of how you build relationships with different people, what's appropriate in how you address people, what's appropriate in the kinds of activities you have. You know, because it's hard to create an activity or an educational session or whatever for a mixed age group, because people expect different things. So if you have a lecturer up there, that may not turn on those young people, and they'd be sitting there with their texting. If you just use texting, you know, to get the word out, that probably isn't going to get to some of the older people. So some of what building trust is figuring out, how do you communicate what's important to different age groups, and how can you provide, whether it's information or opportunities for connectedness, but how do you do it in an appropriate way that will, that will build trust with you and with them. Anyone else? A question about what I've talked about? Yeah.
I think for me, it's how do you get leadership on board, and how do you really create policies that will really support this?
Right.
Because there really isn't a lot of statistics or data to really prove that the intergenerational framework is a healthier framework for everyone or for specific issues.
Right. It adds value. It's not that this in and of itself is going to produce healthy communities. It's that if you add this layer of bringing generations together and thinking all the lifespan, it will add value. So what influences leadership? usually cost savings, usually expanding clientele. So a lot of our work, we were able to add to what caseworkers can do because we had older volunteers helping these families with kids with disabilities. Or we were able to help kinship caregivers be better at supporting their kids because we were able to support them and give them some respite. So it is a challenge to figure out how do you get people out of the way they've always thought, which is silos. We work with this population. We want to improve life for this population. We have funding for this population, and therefore, and you were trained as a child person or a older adult person. So how do we get beyond? So some of it has to start early on. We have to have at universities and colleges and vocational schools. We have to think more about lifespan and just get people to think about it early. And even we have to think about lifespan when we teach kids, when we read them books. About you see all these books about grandmothers and put that into the curriculum. Think about someday you will be older. So then we have to think about how people can change their attitudes early on. And leaders want to be successful. They want to be effective. So sometimes they can't, with funding cuts, we can't serve as many people as we can. So if you engage different ages to help you do things in a different way, you can expand the people you serve. You can go deeper. If we know that social connectedness and relationships are important, we say, okay, we're performing this service or you're doing this educational workshop, but that may not be enough. How do we go deeper? And if we go deeper, how will that really impact health? And there are evaluations of separate programs, but this is a lens, it's not a program. So it's like thinking about what you're doing and saying, if I were more inclusive, we did a community garden with a Latino group in New York. And before they started, it was mostly girls and older women. They had chairs around and they told stories of life in the Dominican and life in Cuba and in Puerto Rico. And then they talked about the medicinal benefits of some of the plants. And the girls had never heard this, and they were so excited. And the older people were thrilled to be able to share some of this information. So they did plant the garden. They did, they did have healthy fruits and vegetables growing, but this was built in. So it's like, how do you take what you're doing and saying, if I just think a little more strategically about this, about generational differences, being more inclusive, empowering people, could I do my work better? So that's what I'm going to ask you to do for about 10 minutes. I'm going to ask you, and why don't you join this group? Can you talk in your groups think about your own work? And if you took this intergenerational lens, whatever you took from this, and applied it, is there a first step? Is there some way that this could add value to what you're already doing? I'm not asking you to start an intergenerational program or to do something totally different, but to add another layer that would make your work more effective and really help you, build health across the lifespan. Okay, so everyone have a place. So if you'll join them. If you all just talk a little bit about how this could affect you, and then we're just going to share a little bit at the end, and then we'll be done.
Just starting to begin is working with the high rises, which is mostly senior residents, and trying to bring awareness about farmers markets and helping people use their SNAP benefits, do education on that, or to show them how close the farmers market might be, what kind of transportation is easily accessible. So that's where I'm at right now, trying to develop it. And so I presented to my group my idea, and then how can I incorporate youth maybe within that project. So my group came up with some awesome ideas about using summer youth programs, maybe doing food testing, taste testing at the farmers market, teaching kids about different vegetables and fruits that they might not be aware of. So something along those lines.
Yeah, that's great. And again, it's a whole family. So, when the whole family eats, and having people, when we did this program with older people working with little kids around nutrition, the parents said, that the kids would then go walk with them through the supermarket and go, oh, there's a tomato. Oh, you should buy some asparagus. And they were like astounded because they hadn't even heard of these things before. So doing some taste testing, doing some little cooking demonstrations, but having the youth involved with the older people. Great. That's terrific. I'm going to get one from each group. And if there's someone, if there are two, is there anyone here who's not? Okay. How about you guys? Is there anyone who'd like to share how this might impact you?
We talked about, a couple of years ago, Dakota County, in partnership with different cities, launched circulator buses.
Everyone, you have to say it louder.
Dakota County Public Health launched circulator buses a couple of years ago in partnership with nonprofits and other groups. And they're now in West St. Paul, Hastings, South St. Paul, and there was a wellness loop for a period of time in Burnsville. And we started to think more about how can we make them more intergenerational. So could we help high school students get to jobs? Could we do different pairings with programs? The YMCA obviously has different programs for different age groups. Could we help transport people to the Y? Make it beyond just a circulator bus that's now serving mostly older adults, which is great, and there's a few younger groups that utilize it, but it's not necessarily age specific, although we are going mostly to older adult buildings. But students and other groups could get on at other locations and get to downtown jobs. So we're starting to think about that.
Yeah, absolutely, because mobility is so important. So if you're talking about teenagers and older people, they're the ones who probably aren't able to drive. And to be able, and then again, as you're doing all this, are there ways that people get to know each other? Could you build into something like, could they meet someplace? Could there be social events as well? Could they interview each other? Could they, there are a million kinds of things you could do to build that social connectedness. But I think mobility and transportation is huge. So having some type of bus that could get everybody around is a great idea. Good. No, okay, I'm not gonna help you guys. Okay, you guys over here.
So I work for Tobacco Free Alliance.
Nice, real loud.
We mainly work with youth groups. So with that, maybe having them educating their parents or older adults would be a way. A lot of times we've noticed that older adults are not aware of how the tobacco industry targets certain populations. And so kind of maybe getting the kids more involved with that. And also like what you were saying about cessation, maybe hearing from older adults how they've been affected by tobacco and to teach the younger kids. So kind of working together.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think tobacco and alcohol, I mean, all that, again, it's part of the family norms and dynamics. And so figuring out how everybody can be a teacher and everyone can be a learner, and equalizing those things. Great. Okay, and I assume all the rest of you have other really good ideas as well, but I'm also going to do one. Okay. Who wants this?
We didn't really talk about this at the time, but it just came to mind afterwards that
nice and loud.
That we work with like health insurance applications, actually all of us at this table, so kind of trying to educate younger folks who might be doing the translating, like what we talked about with the paperwork that comes in the mail from the state or from the counties is really hard to read even if you speak English as your first language. So trying to maybe like educate the youth who are the ones who maybe speak more proficient English and helping them understand it so they can translate it for their parents or grandparents or whoever else is in their household. So trying to bring people together in that way.
Yes. No, great. And I think doing in a way that youth understand that they can also be empowering their grandparents. So again, it's a parentification of youth that happens in so many families where they take on these adult roles while they're still young. It's not always so healthy for them or healthy for the older people. So to make it maybe a family thing. So, maybe the older adults can do something and they can do this. So the norm is we're each doing something. Well, you know English better, so that's okay, but I want to share with you history of our country or whatever it is. The other thing you made me think about, I don't know if anyone's doing this, but Alzheimer's is becoming so prevalent, and most young people have no idea. And again, in communities that are in families that are multi-generational, how do you help young people even understand what might happen, whether it's fall prevention or Alzheimer's, or there early signs that they could be looking for. And again, if parents are working and everyone's living together and the children are there with the grandparents, you know, how are we building their knowledge and capacity to, you know, about these issues around aging? Or vice versa. If the older people understood some of the issues around child rearing, you know, could they understand when they're there what they could do to be more helpful? Well, great. Okay, how about you guys in the middle?
I was talking about how, so I just recently moved up here.
Nice and loud.
I just recently moved up here about a year ago from Atlanta, and a lot of my work there was community oriented. And so one of the examples I gave was me leading a community conversation in one of like highly affected, impoverished community in Atlanta. And so during the conversation, there was a lot of older people there, and a lot of their complaints were around safety with the younger generation there. So I was just talking about like I was trying to think through some different ways I could have kind of facilitated that, especially with me being the facilitator as a young person. And what was some questions that how I could rephrase questions on my conversation to think about how they could become more leaders in their community and be role models and mentors, and so that could potentially cut down on the violence.
Right.
And usually, in my opinion, that in those situations, because we don't really have anything productive to do. Right. So if we like kind of build activities and things, because it was like a community-based community,
Right.
so they had
Right.
resources, but maximizing those resources and actually utilizing them.
Right. So I think this thing about doing things together is really important. So I'm working with in the Latino community in Philadelphia with a multi-service health. They have a health clinic and they do social services. And they're one of these siloed places, and they've never had like the health clinic. There's a school, there's a job training program, there's an older adult program. They've never done anything together. It's all one building, all on campus, and no one interacts. So they started an intergenerational entrepreneurship program. And your point about doing things together, so they're creating crafts together, and the older people, like one person was from Puerto Rico, and she used to make piñatas in Puerto Rico, so she taught all these young people how to make them, and they sell them every 10 weeks. They have a pop-up shop, and some of the older people were seamstresses, and they're teaching these young people how to sew. They're on a sewing machine, and they're making pillows and towels and all that, aprons, and they're working together. And what I found was that it's not so structured, but they're talking to each other. And we have some activities about where to come from. Some are from Cuba, some are from the Dominican, some are from other places in South America. And so they're talking about home, what home means. They're learning. So it reminds me when you're saying just figuring out how can you start discussions and how can you help people see what their strengths are, because a lot of these older people in particular are very depressed. It's a really major depression about health, about their life situations. They love, it's called La Tiendita, a little shop. They love coming because they're having fun, they're socializing with other age peers, they're socializing with young people, and they're doing something together. So it's not like you have to get to know each other, it's more, we're creating this, and sometimes the young people, look what I found online, we could do this way, oh yeah, we could do this, and it's just a really kind of organic experience. So, I hope you can take some of those learnings and do it here. 2 more left. You guys, somebody.
So one of the things that we discussed is working in a clinical area. We come in problems with privacy, HIPAA, so on and so forth. Nancy actually gave us a really good idea because we have support groups, but it's mainly just patients where it's not really integrating anybody else. But she mentioned something about her age and how she's a cancer survivor, and how the younger women that she works with. So I thought about maybe incorporating our patients, the younger ones with the older ones, how they can live with the HIV as long as live that long healthy life as long as they're taking their medication, and so incorporating them in that way is kind of what we can do it while still remaining and respecting that privacy.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And sometimes families are harder, and sometimes people who have experienced the same things at different points in life. We've done a lot of work with the LGBTQ community, and I think there are lots of different views on how open you can be, what some of the issues are. But again, there where you bring people of different ages together and talk about some of the barriers that people have had to overcome, some of the issues of privacy, but then the survival, of many people. It can be really effective. Really effective. Great. Okay, last group. Who's going to say something here?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. She was so interesting, but hi, Angela, and I'm from People Incorporated Mental Health Services.
Nice and loud, so
everyone hear you. Oftentimes, many of the clients that I serve are stigmatized because of their mental health, and I work in two divisions. I work in out in the community in the transition team, where individuals live independently in the community, but they're transitioning from the work world to public services. And so oftentimes we go out and we assess their needs, and one of the major components that we look at is their support system. Right. And who is there in the community, what is the community offering them, as well as friends and family support. And we look for trying to figure out creative ways to kind of get them to try to destigmatize them and get them united with their families and united out into communities, where they do be through education, volunteer opportunities, as such. I also work on the other spectrum of People Incorporated, where it's in the Integrated Services Division. And those individuals, many of them are in a maintenance phase of their mental health, and they live in residential settings independently, but with support services. And so we have 4 to 5 families within those units, and we also have multi-generational families. We have a couple of grandmothers also. So we try to do family-friendly events and incorporate them into the community as well, in the same aspects as volunteer opportunities, just community engagement, teaching and learning, and just trying to intertwine them as much as we can inside of the community.
So this will make you do that more?
Yeah, so just do a little bit more.
It was interesting. I was in San Diego, and I was in a transitional housing development, and it was surprising to me how mixed age people were. There were people who'd been homeless and had lots of mental health issues, but there were young people and older people. And a nurse came in, and she was talking about healthy eating and exercise. And there were about 30 people in the room, and I think it was Valentine's Day, so the kids had some food and everything. But it was so interesting how, even though people had all these problems, they were really smart about different things, had really different experiences. And it was so, I kept thinking, boy, they could really be resources to each other here. And if the organization built that in and said, are there roles for people to take? So maybe there could be healthy eating classes, or there could be people who share their experiences. But the multi-generational aspect, and how some people are getting through this, kind of like your thing, and have moved along, and some people are really struggling. So clearly there are lots of ways, and this was just touching the surface, there are lots and lots of ways of using this intergenerational lens to enhance the kind of work you do. And it sounds like you're all doing really important work in the community. And health, particularly health, physical and emotional health, is so important. And in these days, we're all stressed out, and our country is stressed out. I think we need to work together to really build these places that are good and healthy and resilient for people of all ages, races, cultures. And I wish you luck in what you do. I hope you, incorporate this more, and I look forward to hearing some really fantastic ways that you're doing some new things in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So thank you.